How to handle a stressful situation when everything feels overwhelming. Guided by the quiet guide. You're not here by accident. There's a moment that brings you here, and it rarely announces itself in a way that others can see. From the outside, everything looks normal. You're functioning, you're responding, you're doing what needs to be done. But internally, something is building. You wake up, and before your day has even started, your mind is already active. There's something waiting for you. A task, a conversation, a decision that didn't resolve itself yesterday. You reach for your phone, and it begins. A message, then another. Something you forgot. A reminder you didn't want to see yet. A deadline that felt distant now feels closer than it should. And without noticing the exact moment it happens, you're no longer choosing what to focus on. Everything is choosing for you. Pause for a second. Notice that feeling. Not panic, not fear, just a quiet, steady pressure. That pressure doesn't come from one thing. It comes from everything, being held at the same time. And if you're honest, this is the part that makes it worse. It's not just what's happening around you, it's what your mind refuses to release. You think about one thing, and before it settles, another appears, then another. Then something from earlier comes back. And now, it's not a list anymore. It's a loop. And that loop creates the feeling that everything matters, all at once. That's overwhelm. Let's slow this down properly. Because most people misunderstand this moment. You are not overwhelmed because your life is too difficult. You are overwhelmed because your brain is trying to manage too many active demands at once. And this is not just emotional. It is neurological. When multiple stressors appear, your brain activates the amygdala, the part responsible for detecting threat. Even when there is no real danger, overload is interpreted as risk. At the same time, your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for decision-making and control, becomes less effective under stress, which means something subtle, but critical, happens. You stop choosing and start reacting. And once that shift happens, everything begins to feel heavier than it actually is. Overwhelm is not the amount of pressure you have. It is the number of things your mind refuses to release. So instead of trying to do more, we're going to change how you move inside the moment. The first shift, from reacting to pausing. There's a moment where everything starts coming in at once. You're mid-task, and your attention is pulled away. A message arrives. Then another. Something else demands your attention. And without thinking, you respond. Not because you've decided to, but because it feels urgent. Pause here. Think about the last time that happened. Did reacting actually reduce the pressure, or did it multiply it? This is your brain operating under amygdala dominance. The amygdala prioritizes speed over control. It pushes you to act quickly, not necessarily effectively. At the same time, your ability to pause, your response inhibition, becomes weaker under stress. So reacting feels automatic. But here's the shift. You pause. Not long, just enough. And in that moment, your prefrontal cortex begins to re-engage. You move from reflex to choice. And that small shift begins to restore control. The second shift, from everything to one thing. When everything feels overwhelming, it seems like the problem is volume. Too much to do, too many responsibilities. But if you look closer, it's not the volume, it's the fragmentation. Your brain relies on working memory, which has a limited capacity. It can only hold a small number of active items at once. When that limit is exceeded, performance drops. This is known as cognitive overload. At the same time, the Zeigarnik effect keeps unfinished tasks active in your mind. They don't disappear, they stay open. So even when you're not doing them, your brain is still holding them. Pause here. Think about how many things are currently unfinished in your mind. Now notice that weight isn't from doing them. It's from holding them. The shift is simple. You choose one thing, just the next. And for a moment, everything else becomes irrelevant. And in that moment, your mind stabilizes because clarity returns when attention becomes singular. The third shift, from emotion to observation. There's a moment where stress stops being external and becomes internal. You feel it, a tightening, a restlessness, a constant movement in your mind. And most people immediately become it. I'm overwhelmed. But what if you didn't? What if instead you noticed it? This is what overwhelm feels like. That shift creates distance, and distance reduces intensity. This aligns with cognitive diffusion. When you observe thoughts instead of identifying with them, they lose their grip. At the same time, activity in the default mode network, the part associated with rumination, begins to decrease, which means your mind becomes quieter. Not because the situation changed, but because your position inside it did. Pause here. Notice something in your life that feels overwhelming. Don't fix it. Don't analyze it. Just observe it. And notice how its intensity begins to shift. The fourth shift, from urgency to control. Everything feels urgent when you're overwhelmed. Every message matters. Every task feels immediate. But here's something most people don't question. Urgency is often a distortion. Under stress, your brain develops cognitive bias toward threat. Everything appears more important than it actually is. At the same time, decision fatigue begins to set in. The more decisions you make, the harder it becomes to prioritize. So everything feels urgent because your ability to prioritize is reduced. Pause for a second. Ask yourself, what actually needs attention right now? And notice how the answer is rarely everything. The fifth shift, from doing to structuring. When overwhelmed, most people move more action, more effort, but without structure, movement becomes noise. You've likely experienced this. You're busy, constantly doing something, but nothing feels resolved. This is linked to attention residue. When you switch tasks, part of your attention stays behind, which means you're never fully present in what you're doing. The shift is simple, but powerful. You structure your actions. What comes first? What comes next? What can wait? And once that structure exists, your mind no longer has to constantly reorganize everything. And that alone reduces pressure. The sixth shift, from external pressure to internal stability. It feels like stress is coming from outside. Deadlines, people, expectations, and those are real. But what determines overwhelm is internal. Because pressure only affects you when it becomes your internal state. This is influenced by emotional contagion. You absorb external emotional energy without realizing it. At the same time, your body releases cortisol, keeping your system in a heightened state, which amplifies everything. But when you stabilize internally, those effects reduce. As explored by Daniel Goleman, emotional regulation allows you to remain steady under pressure, and steadiness changes everything. The seventh shift, from collapse to reset. There's a point where your system slows down, You feel tired, mentally blocked, unable to continue clearly. And if you're honest, your instinct is to push through it, because stopping feels like falling behind. But pushing in that state deepens the overload. Your body operates in ultradian rhythms, natural cycles of energy and recovery. Ignoring those cycles leads to exhaustion. Reset is not weakness, it's recovery. Stepping back, even briefly, allows your system to stabilize. And once it does, clarity returns faster than forcing ever could. When it actually happens. Let's make this real. Because everything we've talked about feels clear until you're inside the moment. You're at work, and you finally settled into something that matters. You're focused, things are moving, and then your phone lights up. You glance at it, just for a second, and immediately something shifts. Let me just check this quickly. You open the message, and before you finish reading it, another one appears. Now you're thinking, I'll just reply to this one first. It won't take long. But you already know that's not true, because even as you're typing, part of your mind is still holding what you were doing before. And now something feels off. You're not fully in the message, and you're no longer in your original task. You're in between. And that space is where overwhelm starts building. Pause here. Notice that moment, not when everything collapses, but when control begins to slip. Because it doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small shifts. Now something else happens. You try to go back to what you were doing. You look at it again, but it doesn't feel the same. You reread the same line, once, twice, and your mind isn't settling. This is a tension residue. Part of your focus is still attached to what you just left. And underneath that, your body has already reacted. A slight tension in your chest, a subtle restlessness. You're breathing just a little shorter than before, because your nervous system has already shifted. Cortisol is rising, preparing you to respond, not to think. And this is where most people lose control, not because they can't handle the task, but because they've already lost full access to their attention. Now, imagine this instead. The same moment happens. Your phone lights up. You see the message. You feel that same initial pull. But this time, you notice it. Not now. You don't open it immediately. You stay where you are. And for a few seconds, nothing happens. No reaction, no switch, no interruption. And something subtle changes. Your body settles. Your focus stabilizes. And now, when you do respond, you're choosing, not reacting. Now shift the scene. You're in a conversation, and something is said that you didn't expect. It's subtle, but it lands. Maybe it's a comment that feels dismissive, or a tone that doesn't sit right. That internal reaction, that urge to respond, to explain, to correct, to defend. And if you're honest, the thought appears almost instantly. That's not what I meant. They've misunderstood me. And now your mind is moving faster than the conversation itself. Because in that moment, your brain has already tagged this as a threat. The amygdala activates. Your body prepares for response. And clarity begins to drop. This is why conversations escalate so quickly. Not because of what's said, but because of how fast we react to it. Pause here. Notice that urge. The need to say something, to correct it, to regain control. And instead of following it immediately, you hold it just for a moment. And something interesting happens. The conversation doesn't escalate. because you didn't fuel it. And now, you're still in control of your response, not because you forced it, but because you didn't give it away. Now consider a quieter moment. You're alone, but your mind isn't. You sit down. Maybe you're trying to rest or focus, but your thoughts are already active. What do I need to do next? I forgot about that earlier. What if this doesn't work out? And even though nothing is happening around you, everything feels active. You open one tab, then another, and after a few minutes, you stop. Because you don't even remember what you started with. This is another form of overwhelm, not external pressure, but internal accumulation. This is the Zeigarnik effect, unfinished thoughts staying active, competing for attention, refusing to close. And this is where most people make a mistake. They try to think their way out of it. I just need to figure this out. But thinking more adds more loops, and more loops increase the load. So instead of thinking more, you reduce, you stop. You choose one thing, not everything, just one. And for a moment, everything else is allowed to exist without being held. And in that moment, something shifts. Your mind quiets, your body settles, and control returns. Let's go deeper, because this is where the real shift happens. In all of these situations, work, conversations, internal pressure, the pattern is the same. Overwhelm is not coming from the situation itself. It's coming from how many things are active in your mind at once. And the moment that number reduces, everything changes. Here's something most people never realize. Control is not about handling more. In high-pressure moments, control comes from reducing input, less reacting, less switching, less holding, and more clarity returns. So the next time it happens, and it will, notice it earlier, that first moment where everything starts stacking, and instead of reacting, pause. Instead of switching, stay where you are. Instead of trying to solve everything, reduce what you're holding, because that is where control returns. Pause here and think about this. The situation may not change immediately, but your position inside it does. And once that shifts, everything else begins to follow. Now pause here and look at this clearly. You don't lose control because things are hard. You lose control because everything is competing at the same time. Too many thoughts, too many demands, too many open loops, all active, all at once. And your mind tries to hold them all. That's what creates the pressure. Not the situation itself, but how much of it you are carrying at the same time. And the moment that load reduces, something shifts. Your thinking becomes clearer, your body settles, your attention stabilizes. Not because everything is solved, but because everything is no longer competing. And that's the part most people miss. You don't need to fix everything to feel in control. You only need to reduce what you are holding in this moment. Pause here. Notice what you're holding right now, not physically, mentally. What's still open? What's still looping? What's still asking for your attention, even when you're not acting on it? Now imagine letting just one of those things go. Not permanently, just for now. That's where control begins to return. Because control is not about handling more. It's about needing less at the right moment, Allow me to leave you with this final reflection. You don't need to become stronger. You need to become more controlled. And once you stop reacting to everything, everything stops feeling like too much. Not because your life becomes easier, but because your mind becomes steadier. Control doesn't come from doing more. It comes from creating space. Space between thoughts. Space between reactions. Space between what happens and how you respond to it. And in that space, you regain yourself. If this gave you something to think about, even for a moment, that is enough. If someone came to mind while listening, you can share this with them. And if you want more of these quiet resets, a like or a simple comment helps this space grow. You can subscribe if it feels right. No pressure. This is Quiet Grind Daily, where self-improvers reset, calm mind, consistent action. I will see you in the next quiet moment.